All right, guys, before we get the presentation going, I just wanted to take the opportunity to kind of come up and introduce myself. My name is Chris Rubal. I'm the account manager here in the Central Valley for Palo Alto Networks, and we appreciate you guys coming here to listen to us and have a conversation with you. I've got business cards up here. We also have just an opportunity tomorrow out in Rockland. We're doing it's about a 4-hour hands-on training on our product called the Ultimate Test Drive. We actually get to sit down and play with policy and actually get some run through scenarios in labs. And so it's a good opportunity if you guys are interested in looking at our security platform. It's a really great way to get into it without a lot of investment on your part. So we're doing that. If you're interested, please come and talk to me, and we can get you signed up for that. There's not a lot of strings to it. It's just free training. So we'd love to have you out there as well. And on that, I'll step out of the way here and let Raj take over. We really appreciate your time today.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming and spending a couple of minutes or an hour with us today. I want to make this as interactive as possible, so if you have questions or things you want to chat about, don't be afraid. I'll probably talk like half an hour and then we'll save time to do some Q&A. So, my name is Raj Shah. I run strategy at Palo Alto Networks, just in the South Bay. Hold on, I understand my microphone's not on. Just give it one job, turn on the microphone. Get it right. Okay, how about that? Better? So yeah, we're down in Santa Clara, but I have a very non-traditional path into being here in front of you, so I thought I'd share that. I started my life off as a policy guy, writing papers on military strategy and things, and decided I wanted to serve in uniform and not just write papers, so I ended up joining the U.S. Air Force. Spent about 12 years flying those things around the world. So I got to, I was an F-16 pilot and got to use the airplane as it was designed. So that was good. From there, after my third deployment, I said the taxpayers got enough money's worth out of me. Ended up working in this building, which is the headquarters of Cyber Command NSA at Fort Meade. And it was there that I met a couple of really smart engineers that was far smarter about cyber than I were, and we started a company called Mortis Security that was a company that was trying to stop advanced APTs. So we built the company, moved out west, and ended up in January becoming part of Palo Alto Networks. So that's kind of how I got there. I'm not a technical guy, but have been around the space enough now. So we hear a lot about the word APT. It's the buzzword. It's in the news. You go to RSA, and every company in the world sells APTs. In my mind, APT is almost a little bit of a marketing term. It's just advanced bad guys. And so the other thing to keep in mind is that these are not new. So I want to tell you a story about what I think was one of the first APT-style attacks. So in the summer of 1984, in the height of the Cold War between us and the Russians, there was a massive explosion in the Siberian Arctic North. In fact, they said it was a seventh of the size of the atomic bombs that were dropped in Japan. In fact, our overhead sensors picked it up, and we thought it was a test. But what it ended up being was a massive gas explosion of the Trans-Siberian pipeline. So I want to tell you a little bit about the story, and it's pretty interesting, especially for a lot of government types here. So the story starts actually a little bit earlier. 1979, we began as the U.S. to restrict export. We put in export controls, dual-use controls that say, hey, these technologies are bad and we don't want our enemies to have them. And so there's a whole list of things. And so the Soviets, the KGB, started a unit, they called it Line X, whose job was to go out, recruit spies, and create lists of technologies that they wanted to steal. And one of the senior officers in that group was a guy named Colonel Vetrov, and that's his picture. And he got disillusioned with Soviet life, right? It's always cold, they didn't have McDonald's yet, and decided to defect. So he defects to the French intelligence services, brings with him like 4,000 documents on Line X and what they were trying to do. And obviously, the agents were interesting, but even more interesting was the list of technologies that the Russians wanted to steal and the prioritization of that. And so later in 1981, French President then Mitterrand and Reagan were at a conference in Ottawa, and the French president told us that, hey, we've got this, we've got this defector, he's given us all this data. Do you want us to go up and round up, all these secret agents that are running around trying to steal your data? And a guy at our CIA said, well, let's not just do that yet. There might be something we can do here. So one of the top things on the list was control software for oil pipeline management, right? We had just built our Alaska pipeline, one of the feats of nature to get it all the way from Barrow right down to the shipyards. And the Soviets wanted to be able to do the same thing. And so we had we were working with a Canadian company that was designing all of those pipelines. And so what the CIA did was go and put in false plans into this Canadian company. And we didn't say anything to anybody. The Russians came in, whatever their means were, they went in and stole these plans that were modified to be wrong. And so they built all their valve controls and pipeline controls and this is the CIA guy that was the mastermind behind it, pipeline controls behind that. And basically what it did was not cycle the valves the right way, so it put immense pressure in the pipeline, so it exploded, right? This was supposed to be an $8 billion pipeline. So the reason, again, I bring this story up, A, it's a cool story, but B, I think this was one of the first APTs, right? So if you ask me, what is an APT? It's somebody that's very targeted, right? They know what they want to steal. They're persistent. They've got a lot of time, and they're determined. They're not going to be easily dissuaded. And so I think the corollaries now today are this is the same type of enemy that we have to fight with as defenders of networks here. So, right, so yeah, Ocean's 11. So let me now segue to what I think is a more modern day story, which is Target. And I know probably most of you guys are all experts on this and have heard in detail what happened at Target, but I'd like to kind of just go through the sequence of things that happened. And again, the reason is to show, hey, how determined are APTs? What are they going to do? And more importantly, later on we'll talk about how could attacks like this stop? And what are lessons that we can draw as defenders to make our own systems better? So, right, Target Corporation, as we know, last December, over 100 million credit card records were stolen, right? That's a third of America. Every household, if you ever gone to Target, was stolen. And so how did they do that? So what the bad guys wanted was credit card data that were held on point-of-sale machines, right? The swiping machines on every single one. You saw this is PCI, right? So it has to be on a separate network. It's air-gapped. All these great, compliance things that are supposed to keep this type of data safe. So what the bad guys did was they said, okay, we need to create a whole plan to go and steal these credit card from all these point-of-sale machines, thousands of them, millions of them across 1,000 stores. And so they had a multi-step process to get this done. So first thing they did was they said we need to build some malware to steal and scrape this memory. They bought a piece of software called Black POS. They bought it on the open market for just a couple of $1,000. And then they hired some guys or had some guys internally to modify it. So they had this software basically that once you swipe the card, right, the credit card when it was in transit or held in memory in the machine was not encrypted, so they could scrape it. And obviously when it was put to disk, it was encrypted. So this would basically just steal that data. Now you have to get that software somehow onto all those point-of-sale machines, right? They're on a separate network. They're around the world. So they used a third party, which is a common vector we see, which is you may have all the best security in the world, but if you have trusted relationships with guys that have not the same level of security prowess, you can use that. So there was a heating and air conditioning company that they had contracted with to monitor all of their stores, right? What's the humidity? What's the temperature? Can we turn off the AC in the middle of the night, save a couple of bucks, right? And over thousands of stores, that saves a lot of money. But this company had, 30 people. They did not have a full security team. They certainly didn't have all the security stack of products that most of us here are familiar with. And so what the bad guys did was they used the phishing campaign, spear phishing. They sent an email to basically every employee of that company. Somebody clicked on the pretty cat picture or whatever, and they found a vector in. And now this heating and air conditioning company had a connection, a trusted data connection to every single Target store in order to monitor all of these parameters. And Target, while they had the PCI stuff segmented, actually put some of this SCADA kind of stuff on that same segment. So the bad guys used a vendor who is the least easiest way to get in, and then install that software on every single point of sale machine. All right, now that's kind of like just step one, right? Because you've gotten the data on there, but now you need to collect it and take it home, right? Just keeping it on those machines because they don't have internet access doesn't work. So the next thing that the bad guys did was create an internal server in Target's data center. Basically, what this server did was listen for every single one of those point-of-sale machines to call it and deposit those credit card information. And they were smart, the bad guys, right? So they said, we're only going to do it between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. because that's when the highest amount of network traffic is, and we're going to hide in the noise. So they did this over about 6 weeks, 2 months. They collected all of these different sensitive data and stored it on this one central server. All of this communication now is happening internal to the network, right? So you're never passing the boundary. All your traditional sensors are bypassed, and it's just sitting there. But now the bad guys have to actually take it home, right? Again, they've collected it, now they need to take it home, and they need to know it's ready. Like, how do you even know this stuff is working, right? So one of the things that they did, a third piece of software, was that every time one of those point-of-sale machines would send that batch transfer over to the server, it would send a message home to the controllers, the adversary, that I've been able to steal credit cards. It didn't actually send the credit card info, right? Because likely some DLP solution would have seen, okay, this is a 10-digit string, et cetera. And so they got these messages, and they said, okay, now we've got enough. And so then they executed that central server to do one encrypted tunnel and send it out, right? Because if you did in one fell swoop, hopefully it doesn't get noticed, because if you do it repeatedly, right, there's patterns. And that's essentially what they did. So here it is again, right? This is a very sophisticated attack, very determined, lots of steps in the process. And if we were able to, or Target was able to block those in any one of those stages, they would have prevented this from happening. And this is the kind of threat that we see Palo Alto, all of our customers facing all the time, and are working to try to help. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions on this, or if anybody's heard anything different. Good. Right, boom, and you're on the front page of the New York Times. Seminal event, CEO gets fired. 7 of the 11 board members are under question of whether they should even stay on based on this. So this is now no longer an IT problem. This is a continuity of business and government issue. So, the title of this talk was the four innovations, and so what I want to talk through now is some philosophical approaches to what we think at Palo Alto that helps our customers and helps just practitioners in general try to combat these kinds of threats. And the first one is thinking about the kill chain methodology, right? What are all the steps that the bad guys have to do in order to be successful, right? A targeted APT attack is not just lob over one piece of software and see what happens. They've got to do every single one of these. And let's be honest, nothing's perfect, right? There's not a perfect firewall. There's not a perfect antivirus. There's no perfect system. And so you're playing a game of averages, of can you have an effective control on every stage such that your overall enterprise risk is lower. So the first step that the bad guys do is reconnaissance, right? What's out there, what's probing. If you have a good firewall that's able to understand the type of traffic that's coming in, discern what's good, what's bad, block. Today one of the things we're seeing, and I have some data on this from our customers, is huge, very, very high levels of SSL encrypted traffic. And so if you're not looking inside of that, you're not gonna understand what's there. So get a good reconnaissance stage to block it with a firewall. Then the bad guys are gonna have to take some code and weaponize it. It's so cheap to do this day. Right? You can go hire some guys in the Ukraine. It's really unbelievable. A Zeus bot kit, you can get almost a custom bot kit for like $250. You can have it do whatever you want it to do. Have thousands of servers. It's phenomenal, right? What you can do as a bad guy. So, our view is there's no way you're gonna know a priori all the types of malware that's out there. If it's so easy, if even I can go and build a botnet kit, right? It's just too many. So you need some sort of sandbox, some sort of virtualization engine, so you can take that malware, run it, understand, is it malicious, is it not malicious, et cetera, right? Then the bad guys actually have to go and deliver it, right? Get it through the firewall, through the network, and put it somewhere. It could be through a third party, it could be through somewhere, but at some point it's got to pass one of your perimeter. So have a good IPS. Finally, then the bad guys have to get onto the endpoint at some place, and they've got to exploit that endpoint through a 0-day, even a known vulnerability, because you just haven't had time to patch that system, or it's a non-supported system, right? Especially for us that have spent time in the government, know that we've got a lot of old stuff. They don't even patch it anymore. So what do you do about that? How do you block it there? Then the bad guys, almost before they even start doing C2, right? It's very rare that the first machine that the adversary lands on has the data that they want to steal. So they're going to have to laterally traverse across the network, right? They may do some privilege escalation, steal AD creds, set up internal mesh networks, but usually the data center is where they want to head to. So they're going to do that. Then they're going to call back home to their masters and then exfiltrate. And so I think this is one of the most important innovations for us in the field, because it kind of really breaks down the stages, and we can then, as defenders, think about, okay, for each one of those stages, do we have something that we believe is adequate? And more importantly, are they speaking with one another? So if I see unusual C2 traffic, can I then take that information and make my sandbox smarter? Right, there we go. Okay, next thing, the next big key innovation that we've seen is threat intelligence. And my view on threat intelligence, there's lots of folks that have feeds. I can buy a feed that'll show me 20 million new pieces of bad a day. That's not really actionable, right? Even in the Target case, they had an alert that this piece of malware was coming. It was one of 8,000 alerts that day. So not really helpful, right? We don't have time to go through those. So the way that I think about, and we think about threat intelligence, is how do you make it actionable? How do you then distill and prioritize the types of things you get? And so there's a couple of different key components of that, right? So one is you have to understand what's valuable. Like, why are you a target? Right? If you're a government, is it they just want to steal your customer data? Is it they want to bring you down because there are some hacktivists, right? So there's all different kinds of motivation. But understanding what you have that's most important, so you can truncate your defenses and focus intelligence around that, is important. And then the second is to have a sort of almost, this is like a military intelligence cycle of how do you think about your data. So first is direction. So what do you want to know, right? What's important? Do you want to know that if you're breached? Do you want to know that if you're having data stolen, if you've had outages, right? What are the key indicators that you want your teams to look for? Then you have to go and collect data from both internal and external sources. So what do you have that, what sensors do you have on your network today between firewalls and your IDSs, et cetera? Then you want to have an analysis that correlates all of that data and finally you want to then disseminate it back around to this cycle. So, you know, the key thing I think for a lot of this in terms of threat intelligence is automation. Right? How do you do this without humans in the loop? And we'll talk a little bit more about how that might get done. So the third key innovation I want to talk about is sharing and threat sharing. It's very hard to fight one-on-one against these determined adversaries. It's much easier if it's you and, say, 20,000 of your friendly companies, all trying to fight against an APT actor. So having constructs in which data can be shared real time between organizations is super important. And this is a hard one, right? Because there's liability issues, there's just interoperability issues. You know, let's talk through a couple of those. So in terms of interoperability, many governments as well as the financial industry has all moved towards a 6-taxi format. Right? We at Palo Alto have done the same. So that's created a sort of uniform protocol for folks to share data. 2 is, how do we have these different groups, right? So you have customer groups, you've got sort of government entities that have intelligence that others don't, and then you've got the vendor community. And I'll say quite honestly, I think the vendor community has been the laggard in this threat sharing, right? Because they're like, well, if I know about this threat, I'm not going to share it with my other vendors because that's a competitive advantage. I think they're finally, and we're pushing this, coming to the realization that that's not the right way long-term to be successful, right? We're not going to win by saying, hey, I got one better signature than my competitor, but I'm just easier to use. It works better with everything else, interoperability. And so I think it was just last week we announced it. Symantec, McAfee, Fortinet, and Palo Alto, right, 4 of the largest vendors, have announced a threat sharing alliance. So every day they share, you know, thousands of pieces of malware, indicators of compromise, freely between those, and the group is open for any other vendor that, you know, reaches certain level of ability to provide data. So I think that's a first step in the right direction, and you know, I'm actually personally working on ways to make that better. We're also seeing, on the industry side, the ISACs, the FS ISAC has been the best in terms of being able to solve those liability issues and share real-time data. And I think the government now is starting to make strides in that. There's been some pilots, the DIB pilot and others. But this is an area where I think we as a community and organization need to do a lot better. Right now, actually, I think some of the most valuable sharing has been through informal networks. Right? Probably guys in informal networks here and coming to these conferences is super helpful to build those relationships. Right? You circle the bad guys. So let me give an example of how the sharing can be valuable, right? And so this is, I'm going to give you an example. Obviously, I don't want to make this thing a commercial, but I'm going to give you an example of how we do this for some of our customers today. So we got 20,000 folks around the world. So we had one of our banking customers in London had a malicious executable that we ran in our sandbox, and we found, you know, that was bad. We had this whole string of behaviors, one of which was C2 to this IP address, right? The DNS call out there. About 6 months after that, a retailer in Singapore, so totally different industry, totally different region, received an Android APK, different file, that when we ran in the sandbox, never seen it before, saw that it also called out to the exact same IP address. So what we did in this case was we immediately, you know, blocked that file and say, hey, it's malicious because it's going to a known bad IP. But here you can see, right, it's probably the same threat actor group, but using totally different means in totally different areas. And so this is just one example of how you know, threat sharing can be tremendously helpful, right? So now if you scale this out, you know, 20,000, 30, 50,000 customers, right, around the world, anytime we see somebody do something bad in one place, you can stop it, within minutes at the rest of the world. And so this is why I think threat sharing is so powerful. I think the ultimate way to get this thing to really scale is for Congress to pass some legislation that allows real sharing between different entities. There's a reason that the Congress has the highest approval rating in any organization in the U.S. So I think we're kind of have to take matters into our own hands. And so that's what we've done at Palo Alto. That's what I encourage anybody I see, is that build those relationships and find ways to share, because there's just too much bad new pieces of malware. There's no way any single group can keep up with it, right? So different types of things you can do, right? You can do C2, the malware, exploit techniques, DNS callouts, and URLs where it goes to download. So where does that kind of place us today in terms of how the networks are changing, right? So we know that apps are moving off the network, whether we like it or not. We know that folks are using mobility, right? So we see 300 Android APKs, brand new ones, 0 days a week. Pretty tremendous. Everyone's moving to mobile devices. Clouds and virtualization. Your network is moving off the network. So, totally new paradigms in terms of dealing with this. These are the stats that I said I would share earlier. So 27% of all apps use SSL, and it's 25% of the bandwidth of our customers, and rapidly increasing. So, in fact, I've seen a lot of botnets now that are using, they're hijacking things like Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, to do their comms, because if you're not doing that real-time decrypt, who knows what that was, right? So you've got that going on. You've got sophisticated vector techniques that used to be, the provenance of really high-end foreign governments and organizations. Those are now being, commoditized. Anybody can go out and buy it. There's a whole marketplace for not just malware, but exploits as well. So it's kind of the perfect storm of all these things coming around at the same time. So we have to defend ourselves. It's a massive opportunity. So this is actually the last slide I have, and I'll talk just a little bit, if you'll excuse me, to do a little bit of commercial of kind of how we think about it, and how this ties back into those other innovations, right? So if I think of the innovations, it's the kill chain, it's threat intelligence, threat sharing, and then the fourth one is a platform. And to me, what a platform does is take those three things that I think philosophically are important to protect networks, and let's put them together so they work in an automated fashion, right? I think what I hear from customers is that the most limiting factor is time, right? Humans, right? We just don't have enough people to manage things and create signatures and organize our devices. So what we at Palo Alto Networks do is we've started with the next-gen firewall, which I think most folks are familiar with, but basically it's going from a legacy view of port and protocol type of blocking to a next-generation firewall, which does application ID. So what are the actual apps, right? It's not just port 80. What are all the different things that are flowing across it? User ID, who's doing it, and then integrating IPS and antivirus within that. So threat protection, right? If we know it's bad, let's just block it immediately on the firewall. We don't need a separate helper box. And also it does all this real-time decryption natively. And so our view is next-gen firewall, all these different kind of things have to be integrated from day one. Otherwise, the performance hits are just too high. If you try to turn all these things on with separate boxes, there's no way you can run at line speed. So the Palo Alto innovation, right, was that you take one packet, you perform all of these different types of inspections at once. So the packet doesn't get slowed down. So we start with that as the foundation with this next-gen firewall. Then we go to this our next-generation threat intelligence cloud. So that's our sandbox and our information sharing. So anytime we see a file that we think is suspicious, we've never seen before, we either send it to a cloud server, or for government customers on premises, send it to another box, detonate it in a virtual machine, and understand, is it good, is it bad? If it's bad, okay, let's create a signature for it, and then let's share it. So within 15 minutes, all 20,000 of our customers are now blocked by that bad. So this threat intelligence cloud, we think is immensely important part of it. And then finally, and then, oh, by the way, all that stuff is automated, right? There's no humans creating signatures, right? All this stuff goes, we understand it, and the signatures come back automatically. And then finally, right, we started off on the perimeter and then understanding the bad, but at the end of the day, the bad guys are going to go to an endpoint. So at the beginning of this year, we acquired a company called Cyvera that has a very innovative approach to endpoint protection. And I'll, if you give me a minute, I'll just kind of explain it. So the view is, it's impossible to keep up with all the different pieces of malware, right? We know millions a day. There's no way you can keep up with it from a signature standpoint. Exploits, right? Vulnerabilities, defects in Reader, Adobe Reader, defects in Windows, XP, 7, 8, IE Explorer, all the different things are running, right? There's almost no shortage of vulnerabilities, and in fact, because of the black market for vulnerabilities, the numbers of them are accelerating. So these guys' innovation was, okay, if we can't keep up with these two because they just accelerate too fast, the way that malware exploits a vulnerability is actually limited. There's only so many different techniques you can do. And so that's where our focus is now. So let me give you an example, right? If there's some unknown vulnerability in XP that no one else knows about in the world, you've discovered as a bad guy, you're going to create a piece of malware to exploit that vulnerability. And to do that, what you're going to do is try to break out of memory, through a heap spray, ROP attack, do a sandbox escape. There's actually about 22 of these that are most commonly found. And so what the next-gen endpoint solution says is, okay, let's instrument the endpoint, let's instrument the processes, and if we see one of these activities, let's just kill the process. Right? There's no legitimate piece of software that should be doing heap spray. Right? Just shouldn't be happening. So let's stop that. And so instead of post facto, after the machine is infected, and let's do some scans and look for files and hashes, let's just keep it from getting infected the first time. Let's prevent rather than remediate. And so, we think that this is just a totally different way to think about the endpoint and provides tremendous value and protection. But I said platform, right? So there's some inherent advantages in having all these components work together. So in the case of this endpoint, right, a piece of malware was sent to it, we blocked it because we knew it was doing something, to take over the machine. But we'd like to learn about it. We'd like to know more about it. So why don't we just send that file to the threat intelligence piece, we'll go run it in a VM, and then we'll let it do all its badness. And we'll understand, these are the DNS calls are going to do, these are the registry keys it's going to change. This is what it was actually going for, right? It was searching for, creditcard.exe, right? It's a simple example. But, and so then, once you built all those signatures, you can then send it down to the firewall, so the next time it comes in, you don't have to actually let it go all the endpoint and stop it there. Let's just stop it at the front door. So that's why I think a platform sort of combines those three innovations that I talked about earlier and reduces enterprise risk. So I've been talking here for a while. So let me pause there and open it up for any questions, debate, disagreements. In the back.
You mentioned the sharing of information. Does that mean you'll be working with, in your next-gen threat intelligence cloud, will you be working with a vendor like Symantec so that the endpoint is remediated?
So it's less, right now it's less product integration, right? So we're not using Symantec to, we're not talking to the Symantec product, but what we're doing is sharing between vendors, right? So for example, so in our threat intelligence cloud, we got all these files around the world, and we said, here's 10,000 new pieces of malware we found today. And so we're going to send them to our partners in this threat alliance. and then they can create signatures and do things with it and just get smarter themselves.
I guess I got to the endpoint, which is if they know about it, then it can become part of their signatures the next day.
Could be.
Then they'll know about it. It's not
It could be. My personal view is tomorrow is too late, but yeah, it could be, exactly. But it makes everyone better, and I think, instead of competing on, hey, who's got the most sort of just data or access to these kinds of things, it's more around who's actually preventing is what folks will be competing against, which is, I think, better for the customers. Yeah, please.
Is this endpoint solution actually a client application that gets installed on the client?
It is. So yeah, the endpoint's a client application, takes about 40 megs to run. It's right now on all flavors of Windows, so XP to 8. Soon it will expand to other OSs, but right now it's Windows based. Yeah, so it's an endpoint. It'll be managed through a central manager, just like all of our other firewalls.
Is that tied directly back into the next generation firewall, or is that strictly going straight to the cloud?
So right now it's going through the cloud intelligence, which does not necessarily have to actually be in the cloud, right? It could be on-prem, but that's how the connection is today. Over time, it'll be doing stuff directly with the firewall. So, for example, something comes in from the firewall, where did it go? What was that? Okay, now we can go query the endpoint thing, and so these things are in progress.
So is that the AV product?
It's not antivirus, so it's not traditional AV on the endpoint, right? So we have an AV feature on the firewall, right, that looks at all files coming through and does hash-based sort of signature stuff. So we still have that. This is exploit prevention. How do you prevent your endpoint from being exploited? Yeah.
Talk about performance impacts.
Yeah.
I have all these solutions that are doing all this work for you. What kind of performance impact are you having on the cloud firewall from its throughput?
Sure.
When all these things are turned on and operating at the same time, how much of a hit is there?
You mean from these other pieces of the platform, you mean?
No, all of the solutions we talked about at the beginning.
Oh yeah. So all those, it's interesting. Yeah, great question. So actually all those things are always on, meaning they're already running. And so if you buy the threat prevention subscription, right, it's just a little switch and now it does what it does. But the actual inspection of the packets, it's already doing it. So there's actually no performance hit if you turn on the threat prevention or the wildfire or any of these things, because it's already doing it. Now SSL, there's a slight performance hit for turning that on, but it's pretty manageable. It doesn't cut it in half, for example.
So the next generation endpoint, is that right now you said it's not integrated in the firewall, right? So it's not like a subscription you see wildfire threat prevention URL.
So it's not on the firewall itself, but it will be a subscription, right? It's priced per endpoint. That'll be an option to turn on, right? Yeah, but it's an agent that'll go on every single device. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
What gets shared through the alliance? Is it just the hash, or are there defined fields that get shared?
So we just launched the thing a couple weeks ago. Right now, it's the hashes, right? That's the safest way. So if they want to go get the original file, you can do a quick search. We're doing that. There'll be some indicators of compromise that will be shared as well, and we're looking to expand it. So this is just getting off the ground in the last month.
How do you share this information? Is there a central location for vendors?
Yeah, so we've got some secure connections that are going between the 4 vendors right now. Yeah. Yeah. So right now it's pretty easy because there's not that many. I think as we bring people in, we'll have to create infrastructure to do all of that.
So I'm just curious, are you providing or receiving more information in that alliance?
That's a good question. Yeah, I actually don't know the answer to that yet, but we have quite a few customers that use our wildfire and threat intelligence, so we've got a pretty good purview, but I don't know the answer. Anything else? Chris, anything to add?
No, I think that's about right. Just to kind of let you guys know, we've had some success over the last couple of years getting into rather large agencies. So we've got customers that run our products with 10 gigabit connectivity into their data center. So from a throughput standpoint, it's something that I think really differentiates us. I've listened to our founder and CTO talk about the trick that he had in the beginning was to build a platform that did all of this stuff in parallel. And then we built it into the company that it's become, but that was the trick. It's like, I knew I could do that. Wasn't sure what this next gen firewall was going to be, but I knew I could build this platform that could get to the session layer and look at applications and do all that inspection of the traffic in one pass. And so that's the, that was the kind of the original trick.
Christopher can't say it, but I'm with DHCS, we have it, and we're very happy with it.
Thank you. We have it too, Housing Finance Agency. It's really good.
Thank you, guys.
Well, hey, thanks everyone. If there's anything more that I or Chris can do afterward, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.